Today, we are talking about a better, maybe, way to build bebop-oriented lines like the one I just played using only the harmonic minor scale. What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in this week. A little bit of shameless commerce before we jump into things. For any frequent viewers of this channel, you know, this past summer, my band, Paper Canaries, we released our debut single, B.A.C. Big thanks to all of you who went and checked that out. If you enjoyed that, we actually have a full-length EP coming out in just a couple of weeks, October 7th. You can check it out on all streaming platforms. It is self-titled, so Paper Canaries is the name of the EP. If you feel so inclined, hit the link down in the description to pre-save that on your preferred listening platform, so you can check that out when it arrives. It's got just 4 tunes. Like I said, it's just an EP length, but I think they are some real bangers, so I really hope that you do enjoy that when it comes out here in a couple weeks. All right, with that out of the way, let's jump right into things. So today, we're talking about how to build some bebop change-playing oriented lines that don't rely on learning 2-5-1 licks. You know, if you check me out and you kind of know where I'm coming from as a jazz educator, you know I love learning vocabulary. That's a big part, I think, of how we want to learn how to play. But today, we're working in a little bit different direction. Both things are potentially extremely important. So, the things we need to know for today's lesson, really only a few small bits of music theory. We need to know our D harmonic minor scale. We also need to know the chord tones that are going to be necessary for a minor 2-5 to the key of D minor. So that's going to be an E minor 7 flat 5 to an A7 chord to a D minor chord. I would also add on the 5 chord, there's a few options of what we might think about as chord tones. I would also add the flat 9 in there, the B flat, and then the E or the F natural. They can both sort of be chord tones on an A7 chord, especially when we're going to minor. It depends what alterations, are on the tune, the piano player is playing, all that sort of stuff. So just keep that in mind as we're working through some of these examples today. There's a little flexibility on the 5 chord about what actually is a chord tone. Once we have those things under our command, we can start to use them to create some great sounding lines, but we're going to need to be able to think in 2 directions at the same time. In a big picture way, we need to think about D harmonic minor, and that this entire 2-5-1 is really a D harmonic minor key area. But in the small scale, we need to be able to think about the chord tones that we hit on each chord. They're all going to fit into D harmonic minor, but it's really important that we're keeping track of both of those things to create lines that sound like this. Let's break that down to understand what is going on here. So again, the whole thing, D harmonic minor, that's the entire scale here. But I'm thinking about starting on a chord tone on the 2 chord. So on the E minor 7 chord, I start on the G, the flatted 3rd. And then rather than thinking about each chord scale relationship for each new chord I get to, I know just big picture, I'm all D harmonic minor, moving through that scale, thinking about how chord tones line up as I go. So when I get to that A7 chord, I land squarely on the major 3rd of the A7 chord. If I keep going down, again, squarely on the flat 3rd of the D chord. So here I'm actually connecting the 3rds as I move through this, but big picture, it's all D harmonic minor. Really great way to streamline your thinking on a 2-5-1. Before we talk about how to practice these in a systematic way, let's look at a line that is ascending. So here, we're still going to start on the flat 3rd of the 2 chord, but this is going to lead us in a slightly different direction. If we just take the same approach and just move right up that D harmonic minor scale, we no longer land on chord tones in every place in the same way we want to, particularly on the A7 chord. Now, rather than landing on a good, strong chord tone on the downbeat of that chord, we land on a D, which is not in that chord, and it's not going to feel like we're hitting the changes as much. So we can just modify our line a little bit while we're still staying in D harmonic minor in the big picture sense. By adding a jump in there, so now I'm going up 3 notes, jumping up, skipping over 1, and then resolving back down to that note that I skipped in, all within D harmonic minor, I can land on chord tones in the right places. That's where my skip happened from B flat to D. I skipped over the C sharp, I resolved back down to it. And then again, on the A chord, I skipped over the F, then I resolved back down to it. This creates a nice classic sounding little bebop gesture, but really nails the changes while all being in D harmonic minor. To practice this in a systematic fashion, you essentially want to set up sort of an inversion exercise with the type of lines that we were just working on. So when we're descending, we're going to start on every chord tone of the 2-chord. We're going to descend through D harmonic minor and see how those chord tones play out. You'll notice on that last one, again, I had to change the pattern ever so slightly just because where I was in the line, I wouldn't have resolved to the chord tone that I wanted to as it got to the end of that line. So you always have to be sort of thinking forward and thinking about how can I maybe jump in this scale, potentially add an enclosure, an approach note to land on the chord tone that you're trying to get to end the line in the place that you want to end it. Exact same deal on the ascending side of things. All of those exercises plus a bunch more are outlined in this week's free handout that accompanies this lesson in the virtual studio. So you can find that link down in the description. There are all of those outlined in the key centers you need for the tune Alone Together. That is the tune that we are looking at this week in the virtual studio. So there's a couple keys of each of these, along with some other exercises that are very, very similar to kind of get you going on some different ideas in this direction. So once you feel like that's working, you throw it into a tune. First, by just like plugging in one of those concepts, almost like you would do with a lick. Let's look at the first 8 bars of Alone Together. That's going to mean we need 2 5s in the key of D minor. There's also a 2 5 in the key of G minor, so we'll apply those things in the same way. That is pretty cut and dry. If you want to get this into a more musical context, you got to start to vary these up a little bit. A really simple and clear thing you can do is just because we're always starting on chord tones on downbeats, think about, okay, well, I can start on an offbeat if I just start on any of the non-chord tones. So if I played this idea, I can make it sound probably a little bit more swinging if I just start on the and of 4 with an offbeat. 1, 2, 3. It really just brings a little bit more life to the idea. The same thing is you don't always just have to go up or down. Once you get a good handle on how to line up chord tones using this approach and really making sure that your big scale, again, D harmonic minor or whatever harmonic minor you are leading to, and in the small scale, thinking about what chord tones am I landing on, you can change direction very freely with this sort of stuff. Once you gain a conceptual understanding about how to apply these things in this more open-ended way, you can start to apply it in a tune in a little bit more musical fashion. Now there, I was maybe being a little more heavy-handed than I might normally because I'm really trying to illustrate the concept in that example, but it's just such an effective way to move through minor 2 5s in a way that doesn't require learning licks or doesn't rely fully on licks. Many of these would be great 2-5-1 licks if you wanted to learn them in that way and move them through all 12 keys, but sort of the underpinning of it is this sort of big scale concept of thinking a key center in harmonic minor and landing on chord tones for the individual chords of the moment. Give this approach a try. This is actually the first way that I learned how to play through 2 5s from my first jazz trombone teacher. I have sort of brushed up against this concept in some other lessons, but I wanted to do a really deep dive today because it is so useful. And it's really actually, in more recent time, the last couple of months, it's really something I've been working on with a lot of students because it's not necessarily always the first thing I go to, even though I think it works really, really well. A lot of times I'm going to those 2-5-1 licks first, but this is so effective. Cool. See you in the woodshed.